The kids think I held on to this house because I'm sentimental about a pile of bricks and old timber. They don't understand. There are corners in these walls that hold the first cries of their lives, sounds no amount of money can ever buy back. I'm sitting on the front porch tonight with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hand, looking out at the oak tree that's been standing in that yard longer than I've been alive. The leaves have turned. October in Wisconsin will do that, paint everything the color of rust and honey, then strip it bare before the snow comes. The wind moved through that tree just now, and I swear it sounded like someone whispering my name. My name is David Whitaker, 68 years old. My wife Eleanor has been gone 7 years this past June. And tomorrow, my 3 grown children fly in from Chicago and New York with a plan I haven't been told about yet. But I can feel it in my bones, the way I used to feel a storm coming when I was framing a roof. You don't work with wood for 40 years without learning to read the silence of things. I built this house with my father back in 1975. Pine floors, cedar shingles, a stone fireplace my father laid himself, one rock at a time, swearing under his breath every time the mortar didn't behave. He was a quiet man. My father said maybe 10 words a day, and 7 of them were usually instructions. But the day we finished this house, he stood out front with his hands on his hips and looked at it like he was looking at a child. Then he turned to me and said, "Son, you don't build a house for yourself. You build it for the ones that aren't born yet." I was 26. I didn't understand him then. I think I'm beginning to now. The town I live in is called Millbrook. About 3,000 people. Give or take. We've got one diner, one church with a tall white steeple that needs a coat of paint every couple of years, a feed store, and a post office that closes at 4 in the afternoon sharp. The interstate is 40 minutes east. The big city is 2 hours past that. Most folks in Millbrook were born here, married here, and intend to be buried here. It's just the way things go. This house sits on 3 acres at the end of a gravel road. White clapboard siding that I repaint every 6 or 7 years. A wraparound porch with 2 rocking chairs, one mine, one Eleanor's. I still leave her chair where she left it. I haven't moved it, not even an inch. The oak tree out front is older than the house. My father said it was already big when he was a boy, climbing it on his way to school. That tree has watched 4 generations of Whitakers come and go. It will watch a 5th if my grandchildren ever come back this far north. Inside, the floors creak in places I know by heart. I could walk through this house in the dark and never bump a knee. The kitchen still has the yellow curtains Eleanor sewed in 1983. The dining room table is red oak. I built it the year Rachel was born. And the surface is scarred from 40 years of homework and birthday candles, and one infamous Thanksgiving when Daniel, age 4, decided to test whether a fork could stand up on its own in the wood. It could not. The marks are still there. People ask me sometimes why I don't refinish the table. I tell them you don't sand away your own life. My mornings here are simple. I'm up before the sun most days. I grind my own beans because Eleanor never trusted the pre-ground kind, and I never had the heart to switch after she passed. I take my cup out on this porch, the same porch where she used to sit with her knitting, and I watch the light come up over the field behind the Callaway's place. After coffee, I usually putter. That's the word for what I do these days. I putter. I fix what doesn't need fixing. I sand a chair leg that's been smooth for 10 years. I oil the hinges on the barn door even though they don't squeak. The doctor told me last spring that a man my age needs to keep his hands busy. I told him I didn't need a doctor to tell me that. My father lived to 89, and the day before he died, he was out behind his shed sharpening a saw blade nobody had used since 1962. I keep my father's pocket watch in my shirt pocket. It stopped working a long time ago, but I carry it anyway. There's a weight to it that feels like company. Eleanor wasn't from here originally. She was from a small town in Iowa, the daughter of a Lutheran minister and a school teacher. I met her at a county fair in 1973 when I was 24 and full of opinions I didn't yet have the right to hold. She was wearing a yellow dress that day, and she laughed at a joke I told that wasn't even that funny. And I knew right then I was going to marry her if she'd have me. She did. We were married for 39 years, 2 months, and 11 days. I counted. I still count sometimes. Late at night, when I can't sleep. She used to say this house had a heartbeat. She'd press her hand against the kitchen wall on a winter morning and tell me she could feel it, the warmth of the wood, the way the joists settled under their own weight. I used to laugh at her for that. Now I don't laugh anymore. Now I press my hand to the wall some mornings just to see if she was telling the truth. She was. Of course she was. Eleanor was almost always right about the things that mattered. When she got sick, it was the spring of 2018. Breast cancer. She'd had a scare a few years earlier, but they'd caught it then, and we thought we were past it. We weren't. The second time around, it had moved into her bones, and the doctors used soft words that meant hard things. She fought for 14 months, lost 26 pounds, cut her hair short before the chemo could do it for her. She said she wanted to be the one in charge of that. At least. Eleanor was tough in a way that wasn't loud. She never complained. Not once. Even at the end, when I'd come into her hospital room and find her looking out the window, she'd turn her head and smile at me like I'd just brought her a present. The last week she was home, she made me promise her 2 things. The first one she made me promise out loud, with witnesses, our pastor and her sister Carol, who'd flown in from Iowa. She made me promise I would not stop living, that I would not turn into one of those husbands who folds up and dies 6 months after his wife. She held my hand and said, "David Whitaker, if you give up on this life, I will be very disappointed in you when you find me on the other side, and I will let you know." I laughed. It was the only time I laughed that whole week. I promised her. The second promise she made me make in private. Just the 2 of us. Late at night, with the lamp on by the bed. She held my hand and said, "Promise me you'll keep the house, David, as long as you're able. The children will need it someday. They don't know it yet, but they will." I didn't ask her what she meant. I didn't have to. Eleanor saw things other people didn't see. She'd always been like that. She could look at a person and know what they were going to need before they knew it themselves. I'd watched her do it for 40 years. I promised her. I gave her my word, and in our family, my word is the only currency I've ever trusted. She died 11 days later, on a Wednesday morning. The sun was coming up over the field, and she squeezed my hand once, and then she didn't squeeze it anymore. The phone call from Michael came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days before the kids were due to arrive. I was out in the barn when it rang inside the house. I'd been working on an old rocking chair that belonged to my mother. One of the rungs had come loose, and I'd been meaning to fix it since spring. By the time I got my boots off on the back step and made it to the kitchen, the answering machine had already picked up. I stood there listening to Michael's voice come through that little speaker, and I felt something in my chest go still. "Hey, Dad. It's Michael. Listen, Rachel and Daniel and I have been talking, and we'd like to come out this weekend. All three of us. There's some family stuff we need to discuss. Call me back when you get this. Love you." That was it. 41 seconds. I played it twice. I called him back. He picked up on the second ring, which is unusual for him. Usually he lets it go to voicemail and calls me back 2 days later. We talked for less than 3 minutes. He told me they'd fly into Madison Saturday morning. When I asked him what the family stuff was, there was a pause on the other end. Not long. Just long enough for me to notice. "We'll talk when we get there, Dad." I didn't push. I never push my children. Standing in the kitchen with the phone still in my hand, I knew without knowing how I knew that the weekend coming was about the house. There's something strange about preparing a room for a grown child to sleep in. You walk into a space that hasn't been touched in years, not really touched, just dusted now and again, and the furniture is the same. The wallpaper is the same. The little nail hole in the corner where a poster used to hang is the same. But the person who slept there is gone, replaced by someone older, taller, sharper around the eyes, someone who calls you by your first name in their head, even if they still say Dad out loud. Michael's room is at the top of the stairs on the left. I went in first because Michael was always first. First grandson on my side, first to walk, first to lose a tooth, first to break my heart by leaving, though I'd never have told him that. The walls are still pale blue. The color Eleanor and I painted them the summer he turned 6. His baseball trophies are still lined up on the shelf above the desk, the gold paint flaking off the little plastic batters. A team photo from his senior year of high school sits in a frame on the dresser. He's in the back row, taller than the other boys, his hair too long for the coach's liking. He'd grown up tall like his mother's side of the family. Quiet, too, though I think he learned that from me. I changed the sheets, white cotton, line-dried last spring and smelling faintly of cedar from the chest where I keep them. I tucked the corners the way Eleanor taught me, even though no one would ever check. Rachel's room is across the hall. I always made a point to give her a room of her own, even when the boys had to share. She was our middle child, and she was a girl, and Eleanor said she needed her own space the way a flower needs its own pot. Eleanor was right about that too. Rachel's walls are still the soft yellow we painted them when she turned 10. Her bookshelf is still full, Anne of Green Gables, Little Women, a row of mystery novels she devoured one summer when she was 12. She used to read on the window seat I built for her knees up to her chin, the afternoon light falling across her hair. She's a lawyer now, in New York. And the last time she came home 2 summers ago, she'd looked at that window seat and said, "Dad, I forgot this was even here." And I'd nodded and not said anything. Because what was there to say you can forget a window seat? You can't forget what it felt like to be the kind of child who'd sit on one. Daniel's room is the smallest, the one over the kitchen. He was our youngest, born 8 years after Rachel, what Eleanor used to call our happy surprise. His room still has the faint outline on the wall where his band poster hung for most of his teenage years. Some rock group I never understood. with men whose hair was longer than my daughter's. He took the poster with him when he moved out at 19, but he forgot one of the thumbtacks, and I've never had the heart to pull it out. I made his bed, set out a towel, stood for a minute by the window looking down at the backyard, where Daniel used to ride his bike in circles for hours, talking to himself about who knows what. He'd been a strange, dreamy kid. Now he was 34, divorced 6 months ago, working some kind of marketing job in Chicago. We hadn't talked much since the divorce. He didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't want to push. I came back downstairs slowly, holding the banister the way I've started to in the last year or so. The doctor calls it caution. I call it learning. Either way, my knees aren't what they were, and I've made peace with that the way a man makes peace with weather. The kitchen smelled like coffee and yesterday's bread. I'd baked a loaf the night before, a thing I do every Friday, the way Eleanor used to. I'm not as good at it as she was. The crust is too thick. The crumb is too dense. But it's bread, and it fills the house with that particular smell that says someone lives here. Someone cares. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the empty chair where Eleanor used to sit. I thought about her hands, how she always had a smudge of flour on her wrist, even when she'd just washed up. I thought about how she would have known, without me having to say a word, that something was wrong about Michael's phone call. The screen door creaked. I turned around. Henry Calloway was walking up the path with something wrapped in foil in his hands. Henry doesn't knock. He never has. He just lets himself in the screen door, calls out my name, and walks through to the kitchen like he lives here. After 48 years of neighboring, I figure he's earned that right. David. My daughter sent over an apple pie. She made too many. Says hello. I took the pie, still warm. I set it on the counter and poured us both a cup of coffee. Henry is 75 now, 3 years a widower. He moved out of his house on the corner 2 years ago, after his kids, 3 of them, same as me, convinced him he'd be better off in a managed apartment about 12 miles down the road, near the hospital, where there'd be nurses on call and meals if he wanted them, and a little community room with bingo on Tuesdays. He still comes back to Millbrook twice a week, sometimes more. He says it's to visit me, but I know better. He drives past his old house every time. I've seen him do it. He slows down, looks at the windows like he's checking on a child he gave up for adoption, and then he keeps driving. We sat at my kitchen table. He stirred 2 sugars into his coffee Marlene used to ration him to 1, and I think he takes the second one now as a small private rebellion. Kids coming this weekend? All 3 of them. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at me over the top of his mug. All 3. All 3. David, he set his cup down. You watch yourself. I waited. Henry doesn't speak unless he has something to say. And when he does, I listen. When my 3 came at me, they came together too. Same way. All friendly. All concerned. By the time I figured out what they wanted, I'd already signed the papers. He shook his head slowly. I'm not saying yours are like mine. I'm saying 3 kids together, all of a sudden, with no warning. That's not a visit. That's a meeting. I'd already thought the same thing, but hearing him say it out loud made my stomach turn a little. Henry, tell me something. He waited. You ever regret it? He looked down at his coffee for a long time. The light through the kitchen window had gone soft and orange. Somewhere outside, a crow called, and the sound carried across the field the way sounds do in autumn, clean, sharp, lonesome. "Marlene died a year after we moved," he said finally. "I've told you that before. What I haven't told you is she stopped eating. David, right after we moved, she didn't say anything was wrong. She just stopped eating. The doctor said it was the cancer. Maybe it was. I think it was something else. I think she went into that apartment and her body knew it wasn't home, and her body decided it was done." He looked up at me. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying. Henry doesn't cry. Henry just looks at you with eyes that are wet. And that's worse than crying. Don't let them push you. David, if you want to stay, you stay. They'll get over it. They always do. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. He finished his coffee, stood up, patted my shoulder once on the way out, the way men of our generation do when they want to say something they don't have words for. The screen door closed behind him. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after he was gone, looking at the empty chair across from me where Eleanor used to sit. The apple pie cooled on the counter. The light went out of the sky. I didn't move for a long while. That night I slept badly. I dreamed about Marlene, which is strange, because I haven't dreamed about Marlene in years. In the dream, she was standing in her old kitchen, the one Henry sold, and she was opening cupboards that were all empty. She turned to me with a confused look on her face and said, "David, where did everything go?" I didn't have an answer for her. I woke up before the dream could give me one. I made coffee, sat on the porch in the dark. The stars were sharp the way they get in October, colder, somehow, than the stars of summer. I thought about Eleanor's promise. I thought about Henry's warning. I thought about Michael's voice on the answering machine, and the small pause he'd left when I'd asked him what the family stuff was about. 3 children coming together with no warning. A meeting, Henry had said, not a visit. I sat there until the eastern sky started to gray. Then I went inside, put on a clean shirt, and waited. Saturday came the way Saturdays come in late October, slow, gray, and cold enough at sunrise to remind you that winter isn't theoretical anymore. I was up at 5, made the coffee, set the table for 4, took the apple pie out of the refrigerator and let it come to room temperature. Around 8, I heard the first geese flying south over the field, that long, ragged sound they make, and I stood at the window watching them go. Eleanor used to say the geese were sending messages between the living and the dead. I told her she was being romantic. She told me I was being stubborn. We were probably both right. By 11:30, I heard the tires on the gravel. It was a black SUV, the rented kind, square and shiny and a little too new for Millbrook. It rolled up the drive and stopped under the oak. The doors opened, and my 3 children stepped out into the autumn light. Michael got out first. He's the tallest of the 3, 6'1", thin in the way that comes from gym memberships rather than work. He was wearing a dark wool coat that probably cost more than my truck. But what I noticed wasn't the coat. I noticed his face. He looked tired, thinner than the last time I'd seen him. There were shadows under his eyes that I didn't remember being there at Easter. and his jaw had that tight set to it that men get when they're carrying something they haven't told anyone about. I'd seen that look on my own face in the mirror after the bank called me about the second mortgage back in 1991, when I'd nearly lost this house keeping my own business afloat. I knew that look. It does not belong on a 42-year-old man's face on a Saturday morning visit to his father. Rachel came around from the passenger side. She was wearing a long camel coat and carrying a leather briefcase. A briefcase to her father's house. She walked up the path with the kind of purposeful stride she'd had since she was 8 years old, marching into the school spelling bee. Her hair was pulled back. She looked, I will admit, beautiful the way her mother had looked at her age. But she also looked like a woman who had come to do a job. Daniel was last out of the car. He was on his phone. He held up one finger to his brother and sister and stood by the SUV for another 2 minutes, talking to someone in a low, irritated voice. When he finally walked up to the porch, he gave me a quick one-armed hug and said, "Hey, Pops," and went straight inside without taking his shoes off. Eleanor would have hated that. Michael gave me a longer hug. He held on for maybe half a second longer than usual. I almost asked him right then what was wrong. I didn't. I'd been a father long enough to know that you don't get the answer by asking. You get it by waiting. Rachel kissed me on the cheek. "Hi, Dad. You look good." I didn't look good. I'd had 3 hours of sleep, but I thanked her anyway. I made them lunch. Ham sandwiches on the bread I'd baked Friday morning, with mustard from the jar Eleanor used to buy at the farmer's market. Pickles. A bowl of apple slices. We sat around the table, the same table I'd built out of red oak the year Rachel was born. We talked about the things people talk about when they're avoiding something. Michael's 2 boys, my grandsons, Rachel's recent trial, Daniel's new apartment in Chicago. Nobody said anything about why they were here. About 20 minutes in, Michael's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his face changed just for a half second. But I saw it. He said, "Sorry, I have to take this," and went out onto the front porch. I could hear him through the screen door. Not the words, just the tone. Tight. Low. The kind of voice a man uses when he's trying not to be heard. But the conversation is too important to let go to voicemail. It went on for about 4 minutes. When he came back in, his face was carefully blank. Rachel and Daniel didn't look up, but I had. And I had registered the way Michael wouldn't quite meet my eyes for the rest of lunch. After we ate, Rachel said she was going to go upstairs and lie down for an hour. Daniel said he was going to take a walk into town. Michael said he had some emails to answer. He took his laptop into the small room off the kitchen and closed the door behind him. That door doesn't usually get closed. I went upstairs. Not to spy. I want to be clear about that. I went upstairs because I needed to be in the bedroom Eleanor and I had shared. Because I needed a minute alone with her. I sat on the edge of the bed. The afternoon light was coming in through the lace curtains. I looked across the room at her closet, the door still closed, with her dresses still hanging in there, and on the top shelf, in the back corner, the cedar box. Eleanor had built it herself, in the last month of her life. With wood I'd brought her from the barn. Small, about the size of a shoebox. She'd sanded it smooth with her own hands, even when her hands were shaking. She'd told me, just once, in a quiet voice late at night, David, you'll know when. Don't open it before. You'll know. 7 years. The box had sat there for 7 years. But sitting on the edge of the bed that afternoon, with 3 of my children downstairs in 3 different rooms, all of them carrying something they hadn't told me, I felt the box on that shelf the way you feel someone watching you from across a room. I didn't open it, not then. But for the first time since Eleanor died, I thought to myself maybe soon. That night, I stayed on the porch long after the kids had gone to their rooms. I looked up at Michael's window. The light was on. I could see the shadow of him moving back and forth, pacing his phone pressed to his ear again. Eleanor used to say this house had a heartbeat. Tonight, sitting on this porch in the cold, I could feel it. And the heartbeat had changed. Sunday morning came clear and cold. The kind of October Sunday that makes a man want to put on his good shoes, whether he's going anywhere or not. I drove the kids to the church in town, the same white-steepled church Eleanor and I had been married in, the same church we'd carried each of our 3 babies into for baptism, and the same church we'd carried Eleanor's coffin out of 7 years ago. Pastor Roy is younger than I am now, a thing that still surprises me every time I see him standing at the pulpit. He nodded to us as we walked in. Half the congregation turned their heads. 3 grown Whitaker children, all home at once. That kind of thing gets noticed in Millbrook. Michael sat on my right, Rachel on my left, Daniel on the far end, scrolling through his phone in his lap until I gave him a look. At which point he put it away with the long, suffering sigh of a man who has been mildly inconvenienced for the sake of his father's principles. The sermon was about Ruth, the part where she says to her mother-in-law, "Whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge." I'd heard that passage 100 times in my life. But sitting there with my 3 children in a row, all of them strangers to this town now, all of them about to ask me to leave a place I had no intention of leaving, I heard those words different. I heard them sad. I heard them like a thing being lost. After service, people came up to greet us, old neighbors, Mrs. Pemberton, who used to babysit Michael when he was 3, the Olsen brothers, who'd gone to high school with Rachel. Daniel stood off to one side, polite enough but looking like a man waiting for a bus. Michael shook hands like the businessman he was, firm grip, eye contact, a little too quick to move on to the next person. I watched my son perform that morning. That's the word for it. He was performing. The smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and his hand kept drifting to his pocket where his phone was, the way a smoker's hand will drift to a cigarette pack. We went home, ate lunch. Rachel said she'd help me sort through the papers in my desk, just to get a sense of what's there, she said, in the tone of a lawyer who has already started making a list. I let her. I had nothing in that desk I was ashamed of, and I figured if she wanted to spend her Sunday afternoon reading my electric bills, that was her business. Daniel walked into town and didn't come back for 3 hours. I don't know where he went. I don't think he knew either. Michael spent most of the afternoon in the workshop office with the door closed. He came out twice, once for coffee, once for water. Both times his face had that careful blankness on it, the kind that costs effort to maintain. I noticed his hand was shaking the second time he poured the water. Just a little. Just enough. I sat on the porch and read the paper and watched the leaves come off the oak one by one. Monday was much the same. A slow, careful kind of day, where everyone was being polite to everyone else, and nobody was saying what they meant. Rachel went into town to get her hair done. There's only one place in Millbrook to do that, run by a woman named Cheryl who's been cutting hair since the Reagan administration. Daniel borrowed my truck and drove to the lake. Michael stayed close to the house, close to his phone, close to whatever it was he was waiting for. I worked in the barn. I'd been meaning to finish that rocking chair for my mother for months now, and I figured if I was going to lose this house, I might as well leave it knowing one fewer thing was unfinished. The wood under my hands felt good, familiar. There's a peace in doing work you've done all your life the way your hands know what to do without consulting your brain. While I sanded, I thought about the house being built. It was the summer of 1975. I was 26. My father was 63 and still strong as an ox. We dug the foundation by hand because we couldn't afford the equipment rental. We poured the concrete in 2 batches because the mixer we borrowed only held so much. The smell of fresh cedar came off those shingles in the August heat, and I remember thinking it was the best smell I'd ever known. Better than coffee, better than rain on hot pavement, cedar and sweat and sawdust. The day we set the last roof beam, my father climbed down the ladder, slow, his knees were already going by then, and he stood beside me in the yard, and we looked up at it together. Just a frame, not a house yet. But you could see the shape of what it was going to be. He took out a handkerchief and wiped his face. Then he put his hand on my shoulder, and my father almost never touched me. Not since I was a boy, and he said, "Son, you don't build a house for yourself. You build it for the ones that aren't born yet." I told you I was beginning to understand him. What I didn't tell you is how long it took. It took until Monday afternoon, in my own barn, with my hands on a rocking chair my mother used to sit in, 50 years after he said it, for me to finally know what he meant. You build it for the ones that aren't born yet, and then, if you're lucky, those ones grow up, and then, sometimes, those ones come home and try to take it apart. And your job, your only job, is to remember why you built it in the first place. I set the sandpaper down. I went inside. I started preparing the dinner that I knew, by then, was going to be the dinner where everything came out. I made beef stew. It was Eleanor's recipe, the one she pulled out every time the family gathered, every Thanksgiving, every Easter, every time one of the kids came home with a new boyfriend or girlfriend or a piece of news that needed softening. The recipe was on an index card in her handwriting, tucked into a tin box in the back of the spice cupboard. I'd taken it out 100 times since she died, and 100 times I'd put it back. That afternoon, I took it out and didn't put it back. I browned the beef in the cast iron pan she'd inherited from her grandmother. I cut the carrots on her cutting board. I used the wooden spoon she'd worn smooth over 30 years. By 6 o'clock, the kitchen smelled the way it used to smell on Sunday nights, thyme and onions and slow-cooking meat. And underneath all that, the wood smoke from the fireplace I'd lit in the living room because the temperature outside had dropped to 40. The kids came down from upstairs one by one, drawn by the smell the way I'd known they would be. "Dad, you made Mom's stew." That was Rachel. She stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, and there was something in her face I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe softness, Maybe something closer to pain. I did. I haven't smelled this since. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Daniel came down next. He didn't say anything about the stew. He just stood at the counter eating a piece of bread, looking at his phone. Michael was last. He'd changed into a sweater, the navy blue one Eleanor had given him for Christmas the year before she died. I doubted he'd worn it in years. I didn't comment on it, but I noticed. We sat down at the table. I'd set 4 places, the way I always had, with the good plates Eleanor's mother had given us as a wedding present. I'd lit 2 candles. I told myself it was because the dining room light was harsh. The truth was, I wanted to make it feel like she was there. I asked Michael to say grace. He hesitated for a second. Michael isn't a churchgoer anymore. Hasn't been in years, but he bowed his head and said the prayer his mother had taught him when he was 6 years old. Same words. Same cadence. I closed my eyes and let the sound of my son's voice fill the room. And for one moment, I could almost feel Eleanor's hand on my arm. We ate. The stew was good. Not as good as hers, but good. For about 15 minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Daniel told a story about a co-worker who'd shown up to a meeting in 2 different shoes. Rachel laughed a real laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from her in years. Michael smiled, but it was the kind of smile a man wears when he's trying to remember how. And then the smile dropped off Michael's face, and he set his spoon down, and I knew it was coming. Dad, we need to talk about something. The room got quiet, in a way that rooms only get quiet when something has been waiting to happen for a long time. I looked at him. I didn't say anything. I just waited. We've been worried about you, all 3 of us, for a while now. He glanced at his brother and sister. Rachel had put her napkin in her lap and folded her hands on top of it, her courtroom posture. Daniel was looking at his stew. Neither one of them met my eyes. You're 68, Dad. This house it's a lot. The roof needs work. The furnace is going to give out one of these winters. You're a long way from a hospital. You're a long way from us. And we've been thinking about what comes next. I waited. He took a breath. I could see him gathering himself the way I'd watched him gather himself before a big game when he was 16. We think you should sell the house, Dad, and move closer to Chicago. There's a place Rachel's looked into it, a managed community, like where Henry is. They have everything. Meals if you want them. A workshop, 20 minutes from us. You'd be close to the grandkids. You wouldn't have to worry about the roof or the furnace or any of it. He paused. The house would sell for about $420,000. We've looked. The market's good right now. We think it's the right time. He paused again. We want to do this for you, Dad. This isn't about the money. This is about you. That last sentence was the one he'd rehearsed. I could hear it in the way he said it. Too smooth, too prepared. The same way he'd say things at his job, I imagined in conference rooms, to clients, when he needed the room to believe him. I looked at the 3 of them. My son, who'd lain awake nights as a small boy listening for monsters and called for me to come check the closet. My daughter, who'd taught herself to read at 4 because she couldn't stand not knowing what the words on the cereal box said. My youngest, who'd cried for a week the day his goldfish died and made me bury it in a matchbox under the oak tree. These were my children, and they had come home to tell me to leave my home. I picked up my spoon. I took another bite of stew. Then I set the spoon down. "Why now?" I said. Michael blinked. He hadn't been ready for the question. He'd been ready for resistance, for "I'm not leaving," or "How dare you," or "Your mother and I built this house." But he hadn't been ready for a calm, simple question that didn't fit anywhere on his prepared list. "What do you mean, Dad?" "I mean, why now? Why this weekend? Why all three of you on a plane at the same time? The house has been the same house for 50 years. The roof was old last year. The furnace was old last year. I was 67 last year. So I'm asking, why now?" Rachel shifted in her chair. Daniel finally looked up from his stew. Michael recovered fast. He's good at that. He's trained for it. "It's just we've been talking, the three of us, and we agreed it was time to bring it up. There's no specific reason. Dad, it's just we love you, and we're worried, and we wanted to do this in person." He said the word love the way a salesman says it, not because it wasn't true, but because it had been put in the wrong place in a sentence designed to do something else. I let the silence sit. I've been letting silences sit my whole life. My father taught me that one. He said most people will fill a silence with the truth if you give them long enough. Sure enough, Daniel spoke. "Michael, we said we were going to be honest with him." Rachel's head snapped sideways. "Daniel!" "What we did say that." "Not like this." "Then how?" Michael was still looking at me, but his face had gone a shade paler. "Honest about what?" I asked, very quietly. Nobody answered. The candles flickered. I heard the fire crack in the next room, and the wind move against the kitchen window the way it does in October, and somewhere far off, the sound of a single goose calling out to a flock it had lost. Rachel cleared her throat. "Sure, Dad, we didn't all agree to come here for the same reason. I want you to know that. I came because Michael asked me to. He told me you were struggling with the house, that you'd been having a hard time. I came because I trusted him." She paused. I didn't know when I got here. I didn't know how strong you still are. You look the same as you did 2 years ago. You look fine. And I want to say this, I don't think you need to leave this house. Not yet. Not unless you want to." Michael's jaw tightened. "Rachel!" "No, Michael, I'm sorry. I should have said this earlier. I didn't want to undercut you in front of Dad. But I'm saying it now." Daniel set his spoon down. "I'll be honest too. Then, Dad, I told Michael I was in if we got equal shares. I told him I needed money. The divorce cleaned me out. I haven't been paying my rent on time. I figured if the house sold, and we split it 3 ways, that was $140,000. That was a fresh start." He looked at me. His eyes were red around the edges. "I'm sorry. I should have told you. I didn't know how." I looked at my youngest son. I thought about the boy who'd buried his goldfish under the oak. I didn't say anything yet. I wasn't ready. I turned to Michael. "And you," I said. Michael's hands were flat on the table on either side of his bowl. His knuckles were white. "Dad, Why now, Michael? He opened his mouth, closed it. Dad, I just thought it was time. The market is… Michael. I said his name the way I used to say his name when he'd come home past curfew at 16 and lie about where he'd been. Not loud, not angry, just the name. The way a father says a name when he wants his son to know that whatever lie is coming next, it's not going to work. He stopped. He looked down at his plate, and then he did something I hadn't seen Michael do in 20 years. He flinched. It was a small thing, a muscle in his jaw, a blink that took half a second too long. But I saw it, and Rachel saw it, and Daniel saw it. The three of us watched my oldest son flinch in his chair at his father's kitchen table at the age of 42. I'm going to step outside, Michael said. He stood up. He didn't look at any of us. He walked through the kitchen and out the back door. And a few seconds later, I heard the screen door bang against the frame the way it does when a man pushes it too hard on his way through. The three of us, Rachel, Daniel, and me, sat in the quiet kitchen with the candles burning and the stew going cold. Rachel reached over and put her hand on mine. It was the first time my daughter had touched me since she'd kissed me on the cheek when she arrived. Dad, I don't know what's going on with him, but something's wrong. He hasn't been right for months. I know, I said. Daniel looked up. You knew. I knew when he stepped off the plane. I just didn't know what. I didn't tell them about the phone calls, about the pacing in the window, about the look on his face that I'd seen on my own face in 1991. There would be time for that. I stood up. I'm going to go talk to him. The back porch is smaller than the front. It's just a wooden landing with 2 steps down to the yard, and a single bench Eleanor had me build the year Daniel was born. The bench faces the oak. From there, you can see the whole backside of the tree, the thick limb where Michael used to climb, the lower branch where Eleanor used to hang the bird feeder, the spot at the base where a long scar runs up the trunk from a lightning strike in 1983. Michael was sitting on the bench. He had his elbows on his knees and his head down. He didn't look up when I opened the door. I came out and sat beside him. The wood was cold through my pants. The air smelled like dry leaves and the first hint of wood smoke from someone's fireplace a half-mile away. The stars were starting to come out that hard. White October light that doesn't forgive much. I didn't say anything for a while. I just sat there with my son in the cold. Dad, he said finally. I'm sorry. For what? For all of it. For lying about why we came. For trying to railroad you. For… He stopped. For what, son? He didn't answer. I reached into my shirt pocket and took out my father's pocket watch. I clicked the cover open the way I always did. The hands hadn't moved in 40 years. He glanced over at it, and then looked away. Your grandfather gave me this watch the day you were born. Did you know that? No. He drove up to the hospital in his old pickup. He found me in the waiting room. Your mother was still recovering from the birth. He didn't say anything for a while. He was like that. You knew him, and then he reached into his pocket and pulled this out and put it in my hand. He said, Now you know what time it is. Michael didn't look at me, but his jaw was working. I didn't know what he meant. I asked him. He said, You'll figure it out. and he walked out of that waiting room without saying another word. I held the watch in my palm. The metal had warmed from my pocket. And it took me about 10 years to understand him. He meant that the clock had changed. That before that day, my life had been my own. After that day, my life belonged to you, and then later to Rachel, and later to Daniel. He meant that I'd entered a different kind of time. Father time. The kind where you measure the days by what you've done for the ones you brought into the world. Michael had started to cry. Silently. The way men cry when they haven't done it in a long time and have forgotten how. Dad, I'm in trouble. I know. How much do you know? Enough to know it's about money. Enough to know your wife doesn't know. Enough to know you wouldn't be sitting on this bench tonight if there was any other way out. He laughed a wet, broken sound. How long have you known? Since you stepped off the curb out front. I saw it in your face. He put his hands over his face. 300,000. Dad, I lost 300,000 on a bad investment. I leveraged the condo. I borrowed against the equity. I thought I could make it back. I kept thinking one more move would do it. And it didn't. And now the bank is they're going to take the place. In about 90 days. And Sarah doesn't know. The boys don't know. Nobody knows. I didn't say anything. I just let him talk. I thought if we sold this house, and I got my third, that was 140. Plus what I have in retirement. Maybe I could get out from under it. Maybe Sarah would never have to know how bad it had gotten. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. He looked up at me finally. His face in the porch light was the face of a boy. Not a 42-year-old man. A boy. The same boy who'd come to me in 1988 with a broken arm and asked me if it was going to be okay. I know it was wrong. Dad. I know I tried to manipulate you. I know I dragged Daniel and Rachel into it without telling them why. I know what kind of man I've been this week. I didn't see another way. I looked out at the oak tree. The lightning scar was just barely visible in the dim light. I thought about that tree, about how it had been struck and lived, about how the scar had never gone away, but the tree had kept growing anyway, and was bigger now than it had ever been. I thought about Eleanor, about what she would have said. I thought about what my father would have said. I put my hand on the back of my son's neck. The same hand he'd had on his neck 1,000 times when he was small. Michael, I said. He waited. You should have come to me a year ago. He didn't answer me. He just sat there with my hand on the back of his neck and let the words land. You should have come to me, I said again. Not for the money, for the help. Dad, I couldn't. I know why you couldn't. You couldn't because I'm your father, and you wanted me to think you'd made it. You wanted me to think the boy who climbed that oak tree had grown up into a man who didn't need anyone. And you've been carrying it for how long? 18 months. Alone. Alone. Does Sarah suspect? She knows something's wrong. She doesn't know what. I nodded. I took my hand off his neck. I sat back against the bench and looked up at the stars. I'm not going to fix this for you tonight. Son, I can't. I don't have $300,000. I don't think anyone does, who isn't already on a yacht somewhere. But I'm not going to let you drown either. So I want you to listen to me very carefully. He turned to face me. First, you go inside and you call your wife tonight. Not tomorrow, not next week. Tonight. Before you sleep under this roof again. She is your partner. She married you. She deserves to know what's happening to her family. And she deserves to know it from you and not from a foreclosure notice in the mailbox. Do you understand me? He nodded. He was crying again. Second, tomorrow morning, you and I are going to sit down at that kitchen table, and you are going to show me every number, every account, every debt. I'm not a finance man, but I'm not a fool. We're going to look at it together. We're going to find out what's real and what's panic. Because most of the time, when a man's been carrying a thing alone for 18 months, it's grown teeth in the dark that it doesn't actually have. Okay. Third, I have $80,000 saved. Michael, it's not 300, but it's something. And it's yours if you need it. Not as a loan, not as a debt, as your father helping you stand up. He shook his head violently. Dad, no. I'm not taking your money. That's your retirement. Michael, I cut him off. I'm 68 years old. I own this house outright. I have my pension. I don't need $80,000. What I need is to know my son has a roof over his children's heads. That money is not mine. It never was. It was always yours and your brothers and your sisters. I was just holding it for you until you needed it. And now you need it. He was sobbing now, quietly. His shoulders shook. Fourth, I said. He looked up. Fine, I am not selling this house. Michael, not this year. Not next year. Not until I can't climb the stairs anymore. And maybe not even then. Your mother asked me to keep it, and I told her I would. And I have never, in 40 years, broken a promise to that woman. I am not starting now. He nodded. He didn't argue. And fifth, I said, whatever you do, whatever happens with the house in Chicago, whatever happens with the money, whatever happens with your job, you remember this. You have a place to come home to, you and your brother and your sister. As long as this house stands, you have a place. That's what your grandfather meant. That's what I built it for. That is the only thing it has ever been for. I let that sit. The wind moved through the oak. A few last leaves came down. One of them landed on my knee. I picked it up, red and gold and curled at the edges, the veins still showing. I rolled the stem between my fingers and watched it spin. Now go inside, I said. Wash your face. Call your wife. I'll keep your stew warm. He stood up. He was unsteady on his feet, the way a man is when he's just been let off a great weight. He took 2 steps toward the door. Then he turned around and came back, and he leaned down, and he hugged me hard, the way he hadn't hugged me since he was 9 years old. I felt the front of his sweater against my cheek. I smelled the laundry soap his wife used. Thank you, Dad. Go on. He went inside. I sat on the bench for a long time after he was gone. The cold worked its way into my knees. I didn't move. I looked at the oak. And I thought about all the people that tree had outlived, and all the people it would outlive after me. After a while, the back door opened again, and I heard footsteps. Light ones. Rachel. She sat down beside me on the bench without saying a word. She'd brought a blanket. She put it over my shoulders. We sat there together in the dark. The heartbeat of the house had changed again. I could feel it. It was steadier now. Not fixed, nothing was fixed, but steadier. Like something that had been pulling itself out of joint was beginning to settle back into place. Behind us, through the kitchen window, I could hear my son on the phone. His voice was low and breaking. He was telling his wife the truth. I closed my eyes. I thought, Eleanor, I think the day is coming. I think the box is going to need to be opened soon. Then I opened my eyes and looked at my daughter, sitting beside me in the cold under the oak. And I knew for the first time in a very long time that I was not alone. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in our bed, Eleanor's and mine, with the moonlight coming through the lace curtains and falling across the empty side where she used to be. I lay there with my hands folded on my chest and my eyes open. And I went over the dinner in my head the way a man goes over a job he hasn't finished, looking for the seams that are crooked, the corners that didn't quite meet. I told Michael 5 things on that bench. I meant every one of them, but meaning a thing and knowing how to live with it are 2 different houses, and I'd only just started building the second one. $80,000. That's most of what Eleanor and I had saved over 43 years of working. It wasn't much. It wasn't going to make Michael whole, but it was real money. Real enough that I'd flinched when I said the number out loud, and I hadn't wanted Michael to see that flinch. So I'd put the words out fast, the way you tear off a bandage. I wasn't worried about myself. A man my age, with a paid-off house and a pension, doesn't need much. I'd been buying my coffee beans and my flour and my newspapers on the same modest budget for years. The $80,000 had always been more about my pride than my survival, the comfort of knowing I had a cushion, the luxury of saying yes when one of the kids asked for help. I lay there and I thought about my father. I thought about how the year I almost lost this house in 1991, he'd shown up at my door one morning with a check for $9,000, every penny he had left from his own retirement, and he'd put it on my kitchen counter without a word and walked out. I'd torn it up. I'd been too proud. And then a week later, when the bank had called me again, I'd taped the pieces back together and cashed it. He'd never mentioned it again. Not once. Not for the rest of his life. That was the kind of father he'd been. Quiet. Useful. The kind whose love showed up in money and in raised barns and in the borrowed truck on a Saturday afternoon when your engine wouldn't turn over. He never said the word love to me. Not even on his deathbed. He didn't have to. He'd been saying it with his hands for 63 years. I figured I had a chance to be that kind of father to Michael, just once. And then I closed my eyes and let myself drift, knowing I wouldn't sleep, but knowing the night would pass anyway, the way nights do. I came downstairs at 5:30. The house was quiet in a different way than it usually was. 3 other people were breathing under that roof, and even in their sleep. I could feel them. I could feel Rachel down the hall, and Daniel above the kitchen, and Michael behind the door across from mine. The house was full again. It hadn't been full in 7 years. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table by myself, in the dark, with just the little stove light on, and I waited for the sun to start showing itself through the eastern window. Around 6, I heard footsteps on the stairs. It was Rachel. She was wearing one of Eleanor's old robes, the blue terrycloth one with a coffee stain near the pocket that had never quite come out. She must have found it in the closet. She stopped in the kitchen doorway when she saw me, and for a second, she looked exactly like her mother. 25 years younger and standing in that same doorway in the same robe, asking me if I'd remembered to put the trash out. "Couldn't sleep either," she said. "No." She came in, poured herself a cup, sat down across from me, the seat where her mother used to sit. She didn't seem to notice she'd chosen it. Or maybe she did, and she'd chosen it on purpose. For a while, we didn't say anything. The clock on the wall ticked. The coffee made small sounds in our mugs. I read for a long time last night," she said finally. "I went into my old room and I read for hours. I found Anne of Green Gables on the shelf, the same copy I had when I was 11. There was a note tucked inside the back cover. From Mom." I looked up. What did it say?" It said, "Rachel, you read this 5 times the year you were 12. I never had the heart to tell you. I love you, Mom." She held the mug with both hands. She was looking down into it. "Dad, I haven't been a good daughter." "Don't say that." I haven't called you enough. I haven't come home enough. I let Michael talk me into something I should have seen through right away. I'm a lawyer, for heaven's sake. I can read a contract. I should have been able to read my own brother. He's good at hiding things. He always was. That's not an excuse. I'm not making one for you, sweetheart. I'm telling you the truth about your brother." She let the silence sit for a minute. Then she looked up at me, and her eyes were full of something that wasn't quite tears, but was on its way. Mom would have caught it. She would have known the minute he called her. "Yes," I said. "She would have. I miss her, Dad." "I know, honey. I miss her every day. And I never told you that, because I thought if I told you, it would make it worse for you. And so I stopped calling. I stopped coming. Because I couldn't be in this house without her. And I'm so sorry." She started crying then. Not loud. Just the way her mother used to cry. With her shoulders very still and the tears coming down without any sound at all. I reached across the table and put my hand on hers. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. The sun came up while we sat there. Michael came downstairs at 6:45. He looked like a man who hadn't slept either, but a different kind of not sleeping than mine. The kind that comes from finally putting something down after carrying it for a year and a half. His face was red around the eyes, but the tightness around his jaw was gone. He looked, for the first time since he'd arrived, like my son. He was carrying his laptop and a brown leather folder. He set them down on the kitchen table without a word. He poured himself a cup of coffee. He sat down across from me. Rachel had gone back upstairs to get dressed, leaving the two of us alone. "Sarah called you back?" I asked. "We talked until 2 in the morning." "How is she?" He was quiet for a long moment. He stared down at the laptop. She's angry, Dad. She's hurt. She said the worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was that I didn't tell her. She said she could have helped me carry it. She said I'd treated her like a stranger in my own house. She's right. I know. Is she leaving you? No. I asked her that. She said we'd figure it out, but that we'd figure it out together from now on. And that if I ever did this again, that would be it. Then you're a lucky man, Michael. I know. He opened the laptop. He turned it so I could see the screen. He'd put together a spreadsheet, columns of numbers, neat and black and white, the way a man like Michael talks when he can't talk any other way. Debts on the left, assets on the right. The difference at the bottom in red. I'm not a finance man. I told him that on the bench, but I'd run a small contracting business for 32 years, and I'd done my own books for every one of them. And I'd known how to read a column of numbers since I was 9 years old, helping my father balance the checkbook at the kitchen table. We sat there together for the better part of 2 hours. The picture wasn't as bad as he thought. That was the first thing I noticed. The condo in Chicago was worth more than he'd been telling himself. He'd been using a panic number, not a real one. His retirement account had recovered some since the initial loss, and there was a piece of land in Indiana, left to him by Eleanor's brother when he died, that Michael had completely forgotten about. He'd never even visited it. It wasn't a lot, maybe $25,000, but it was real. When you added it up, the condo, the retirement, the Indiana land, my $80,000, and whatever Sarah had in her own name, the gap closed, not to zero, but to about 90,000, a hill, not a mountain. 90,000, Michael said. He said it the way a man says a word in a foreign language he's trying to learn. But in 90,000, that's a number you can work with. Son, that's a 5-year plan. That's not a catastrophe. That's a problem. And you don't have to sell the condo. If you and Sarah want to stay there, you find a way. If you'd rather move somewhere smaller, that's another option. But you have options. Michael, you have more options than you've been letting yourself see, because you've been seeing this through the dark, alone, for 18 months. And things look different in the dark. He sat back in his chair. He let out a long breath. How did you do that? Do what? How did you make it not look like the end of the world? I almost smiled. Son, I'm 68. I've watched the end of the world be just about everything at one point or another in my life. Your mother got cancer. That was the end of the world. The economy went sideways in 1979. That was the end of the world. We almost lost this house in 91. That was the end of the world. Your sister moved to New York and we didn't see her for 2 years. End of the world. You marry your wife. End of the world begins again. Only this time it's a good one. I picked up my coffee. The trick is, every end of the world is only the end of one world. There's always another one coming behind it, if you live long enough to see it. He sat there for a long time, looking at me. Then he closed the laptop. Mom would be glad, he said. For what? That you're still doing this, being a father. To me, I thought maybe after she died, I don't know. I thought maybe we'd just become old friends or something. But you're still my father. I'm still your father. Son, I'm going to be your father until they put me in the ground. And probably after that too. Knowing me. He laughed. A real laugh this time. The first one I'd heard from him all week. Rachel came down the stairs. She had clothes on now, jeans, and one of Eleanor's old cardigans she'd found somewhere. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the two of us. You guys figured it out? Working on it, Michael said. Where's Daniel? I asked. Rachel made a face. Still asleep? I tried knocking. He grunted at me. Some things don't change, Michael said. Rachel sat down. She poured herself another cup of coffee. The three of us sat there in the kitchen, in the morning light, with the coffee pot between us. The way we used to sit when the kids were teenagers, and weekend mornings were the only time we were all in the same room. I missed Eleanor so much in that moment I couldn't breathe. I just sipped my coffee, and I let the missing wash over me, and I let it pass. The way grief does, in waves. Daniel didn't come downstairs until almost 10. When he did, he looked terrible. He had stubble across his jaw and his hair was sticking up on one side. He was wearing the same shirt from the day before, half tucked into a pair of sweatpants. He stood in the kitchen doorway and squinted at us like we were a flock of birds. He hadn't been expecting to see in the yard. Coffee, Rachel said. Yes. He shuffled to the counter, poured himself a cup, and brought it to the table. He sat down heavily. He took a sip. He stared at the wall above my head. Michael and Rachel had gone quiet. They were both waiting for me to say something. I knew what they wanted me to say something about last night. Something fatherly. Something that would set Daniel straight about the way he'd come into this house with his hand out and his agenda barely hidden. But that's not what came out of my mouth. What came out of my mouth was this. Daniel, you want to take a walk with your old man? He looked at me. He looked at his coffee. He looked at his brother and sister. Yeah, Dad, okay. We put on our jackets. I put on the brown canvas one I've worn for 20 years. The one with the patch on the elbow where I caught it on a nail in the barn back in 2003. Daniel borrowed one of mine, the green one Eleanor had given me for our 30th anniversary. He didn't know it had been hers to give. I didn't tell him. We walked out into the cold. The sun was up but pale, the way it gets in late October when the year has decided it's done with warmth. The grass was stiff with frost. Our breath came out in white clouds in front of us. We walked down to the oak tree. I stopped at the base of the trunk. I put my hand on the bark. I felt the deep, rough lines of it under my palm, 50 years of weather written into the wood. You remember Goldie, I said. Daniel looked at me sideways. My goldfish. Your goldfish. I haven't thought about Goldie in 20 years. Your mother bought him for you at the county fair. The summer you were 6, he cost $1. I cried for a week when he died. You did. You wouldn't eat. Your mother was beside herself. She kept asking me what we should do. I told her we should bury him, like he was a person, because to you, he was. And you dug a hole right here, right under the oak. I dug a hole right here. With your little shovel, you picked out a matchbox. We put Goldie inside, with a piece of his pellet food, in case he was hungry on the way to wherever fish go. Daniel didn't say anything. He was looking down at the dirt at the base of the tree. And I told you something that day. Do you remember what I told you? No, Dad. I told you, Daniel, the things we love, we put them in the ground here. That's what this tree is for. It's what's been holding our family up since before you were born and after you're gone. And nothing we put under it ever really leaves us. It just goes into the roots. And it comes back up in the leaves. Daniel was quiet for a long time. I don't remember you saying that. You were 6. You were sad. You were probably thinking about your fish. Not me. But I said it. And I meant it. I turned to look at him. Son, I want to tell you something. And I need you to listen. Because I don't say things twice. And your mother used to remind me that I should. But I never learned to. He turned to face me. You came home this weekend with your hand out? I'm not going to pretend I didn't notice. You needed money. You needed a way out of the corner you'd backed yourself into with the divorce and the rent and whatever else. And the way you tried to get there, I'm not proud of you for that. I want you to know that. He flinched a little. The way Michael had flinched at the table. But I'm not angry, son. And I want you to know that too. Because the reason you couldn't come to me directly, the reason you had to come along on Michael's plan, is the same reason Michael couldn't come to me directly. You boys think you're not allowed to need me anymore. You think a grown man asking his father for help is a kind of failure, and somewhere along the way, I let you believe that. And I'm sorry. Because it isn't true. It's never been true. And the day I'm not the man my children can come to is the day I'm not worth standing up in the morning. His eyes had filled. He looked away. He wiped at them with the back of his hand. Dad. What's going on, son? Really, tell me. He took a breath. I'm broke. Dad. I lost the apartment, my new one. I haven't paid rent in 2 months. I've been couch surfing with a friend. The marketing job isn't real. I got laid off in August. I haven't told anyone. I was waiting for this weekend. I thought if we sold the house, I'd have time to figure it out. And now you're not selling the house. And I'm out of road. Dad. I'm just out of road. He sat down right there at the base of the oak, in the cold dirt, with his back against the trunk. And he cried. Not the way Michael had cried. Not the silent crying of a man who had forgotten how. He cried the way Daniel had always cried, loud, messy, wide open. The way a 6-year-old cries when his goldfish dies. I sat down beside him in the dirt. I put my arm around his shoulders. You're not out of road, son. You're just on a different road than you thought you were on. That's all. We sat there at the base of the oak for I don't know how long. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe an hour. I lost track. The cold worked its way up through the seat of my pants and into my hip joints. But I didn't move, because Daniel was still leaning against me, and I had been waiting for a long time to be leaned on by my youngest son again. Eventually he sat up, wiped his face with both hands, looked out across the yard at nothing in particular. I don't know how to come back from this, Dad. You don't have to know yet. You just have to take the next step, which is you come inside, you eat some breakfast, and we figure out the next 30 days. We don't worry about the rest of the year. We don't worry about the rest of your life. We figure out the next 30 days, and then the 30 after that. That's how a man rebuilds. He nodded. What's the first step? Telling Michael and Rachel, because they don't know any of this. They thought you were after 140,000 because you were greedy. They didn't know you were drowning. And as long as they don't know, they're going to be carrying a wrong picture of you in their heads. And that's not fair to you. And it's not fair to them. So you go inside, and you tell them. The same way Michael told me last night. Daniel breathed out, long and slow. Okay, Dad. We stood up. My knee popped doing it. He noticed. He almost said something. I gave him a look, and he closed his mouth. And I loved him for that. We walked back to the house. At the back porch, before we went inside, Daniel stopped. Dad, I'm sorry. I know I've said it a couple of times, but I'm sorry. I know you are, son. Come on. There's coffee. We went inside. I let Daniel talk to Michael and Rachel by himself. I went upstairs. I went up to my bedroom, Eleanor's and mine, and I closed the door behind me. And I sat on the edge of the bed. And I looked at the closet. It was a hard morning. What I'd just done with the boys. I had earned a moment with my wife. I opened the closet door. The smell came out at me the way it always did. Cedar from the lining. A faint touch of her perfume from a bottle of Chanel No. 5 that had sat on the top shelf for 12 years now, evaporating down to almost nothing. Her dresses still hung there. The blue one she'd worn to Rachel's law school graduation, the cream-colored one from Michael's wedding, the yellow one from the county fair where I'd met her. She'd kept it her whole life, and I'd never had the heart to give it away. On the top shelf, in the back corner, the cedar box. I looked at it. I had not opened it in 7 years, not because I was afraid of it, because Eleanor had told me not to. I had been waiting for a sign, for some unmistakable moment when the universe would lean over and whisper in my ear, David, now. It's time. I'd thought maybe Michael's flinch at the dinner table was the sign. I'd thought maybe Daniel crying in the dirt at the base of the oak was the sign. But neither one had felt quite right. They had felt like steps along the way. Like the kids weren't quite ready yet for whatever was inside that box. I sat there looking at it for a long time. And then I reached up, and I took it down. It was lighter than I remembered. I'd been carrying its weight in my head for 7 years, and the actual wood of the thing was less heavy than I'd been imagining. I set it on the bed. I sat down next to it. I didn't open it, not yet. I just sat with it, the way you sit with someone in a hospital room, the way you sit with a coffin during a wake, the way you sit with a thing you love that is also a thing you fear, because they are sometimes the same thing. I put my hand on the lid. The wood was smooth under my palm. Eleanor had sanded it for hours. I remembered watching her do it from the bedroom doorway, her hands thin and trembling but moving in those long, patient strokes. The same way she'd brushed our daughter's hair when Rachel was small. I remembered something she'd said while she was working on it. I hadn't thought about it in years. She'd said, "David, when the day comes that you open this, I want you to know I'm not in it. I'm not in any box. I'm where I always was. Don't go looking for me in here. Just give the children what's theirs." I'd nodded at the time. I hadn't really understood her. Sitting on the bed with the box in my lap, I understood her. She had known. She had known what she was leaving for them, and she had known I would worry about whether opening the box would be a kind of grave robbing. She had been telling me even before she was gone that this was not her grave. This was her last gift, and she didn't want me to confuse the two. I closed my eyes. I leaned my forehead against the lid of the box. "Eleanor," I said, out loud, in the empty room. "I think it's time." I didn't hear an answer. I didn't expect to. Eleanor had said her goodbyes a long time ago, but I felt something settle in my chest the way a window settles in a frame when the weather is right. I didn't open the box, but I took it down off the shelf. I set it on her side of the bed, the side I hadn't put anything on in 7 years. When the 3 children were ready, I would bring them up here. That was all I knew. I came back downstairs around 11. The 3 of them were still at the kitchen table. They looked up when I came in. The conversation had clearly run its course, Daniel had told them, the way he was supposed to, and they had absorbed it the way family absorbs the news that one of its own has been quietly going under. With shock first, and then with the gathering kind of love that families do best when they are at their best. Rachel had her hand on Daniel's shoulder. Michael was looking down at the table with the same expression he'd had on the back porch the night before. A man who was finally seeing the size of the thing his family had been carrying without him. "Dad," Michael said, "Daniel needs a place to stay." "Daniel has a place to stay." "Where?" "Here. This is his place. It has always been his place. Same as it's yours. Same as it's Rachel's. He stays as long as he needs to stay." Daniel looked at me. "Dad, I can't." "You can, and you will. Until you get back on your feet. And don't argue with me, son. I'm an old man, and I have very few pleasures left. And one of them is making decisions in my own house. Don't take it from me." He laughed, wetly. He didn't argue. "There's something I need to do," I said. "I'm going to be gone an hour, maybe 2. I want the 3 of you to stay here and have lunch and talk to each other. Not about the house, not about the money. Just talk to each other. The way you used to talk when you'd come home from school. Tell each other what's going on in your lives. I'll be back." Rachel looked at me. "Where are you going?" "Dad." "To see Henry." I drove to the diner. Marlene's Diner is the only place in Millbrook to eat that isn't your own kitchen or the church potluck. It's been on Main Street since 1961. Same booths, same Formica countertops, same handwritten menu on the wall, though they update the prices in pencil every now and then. The woman who runs it now is the granddaughter of the original Marlene, and she's named Marlene too, because some families decide a name belongs to a place and not to a person. Henry was at the counter, the way I knew he would be. He's there most Tuesdays at noon. Black coffee, slice of cherry pie. The newspaper folded next to him. He looked up when I came in. He saw my face. He didn't say anything. He just slid over one stool to make room. I sat down beside him. Marlene poured me a coffee without asking. I took a sip. I looked at the pie display. "How'd it go?" Henry asked. "It was a hard weekend. Henry, they asking you to sell." They were. Then they weren't. Then we had a different kind of week than the one they planned. He didn't push. He just sipped his coffee. I told him. The whole thing. Michael's debt, Daniel's situation, Rachel finding her mother's note in a children's book, the conversation on the back bench, the morning at the kitchen table with the spreadsheet, the walk to the oak, Daniel in the dirt, the 80,000, all of it. I talked for the better part of 45 minutes. Henry didn't interrupt once. He just sat there, eating his pie one careful forkful at a time, listening with the kind of attention that's rare in a world that has mostly forgotten how to give it. When I was done, he set his fork down. "David," he said, "you did right." Did I? You did right by all three of them. You held your ground on the house. You opened your hand for the money. You let each one of them tell you the truth. That's a thing most fathers never figure out how to do. You did it in 3 days. I'm not sure I figured anything out. Henry, I did what came next. Sean, that's all wisdom is. David, doing what comes next. The men who think they're wise, the men who give speeches about it, who write books about it, they're not. The wise ones just keep doing the next right thing, and they don't make a big show of it. You've been doing that for 50 years. I've watched you do it. It's why I keep coming back to this diner instead of staying in my apartment with the bingo and the meals. I looked at him. Henry, I think you should move back. He blinked. What? Move back. There's a little house on Aspen Street that's been empty since the Henderson woman died. I happen to know it's going to go up for sale next month. It's small. You don't need much. You could buy it with what you've got left from selling your place. You could come home. Henry. He looked at me for a long time. His eyes did the wet thing they do. My kids would have a fit. Let them. You let them have their fit 2 years ago, and you've been paying for it ever since. He didn't answer. He picked his fork back up. He ate the last bite of his pie. He chewed slowly. He set the fork down. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. He paid for both of our coffees, which he never does. He clapped me on the shoulder on his way out the door. He walked to his car. He drove away. But he didn't drive past his old house on the corner this time. He drove the other way, toward town, toward Aspen Street. I sat at the counter for another minute, looking at the empty stool beside me. Then I went home. The afternoon light was slanting through the trees on the way back. The oak was bare now. The last of its leaves had come down sometime that morning while Daniel and I had been crying in the dirt at its base. The yard was covered in red and gold. The wind was still. I parked the truck. I sat in it for a minute before I got out. Tonight, I thought, tonight is the night. I went inside, When I walked back into the kitchen, the three of them were still at the table. They had cleared away the breakfast dishes. They were drinking fresh coffee. Daniel had his hands wrapped around his mug the way a man does when he's trying to remember he's still here. Michael had pulled a yellow legal pad from somewhere and was making notes in his careful, square handwriting. Rachel was telling them something. I caught the tail end of it, about a case she was working on back in New York, about a man who'd inherited a building from his uncle and then spent a year trying to give it back because he hadn't wanted it in the first place. They stopped when I came in. "Dad," Rachel said. "How's Henry?" "Henry's going to be all right. I think he might be coming home." Michael looked up. "Coming home." "Back to Millbrook. There's a house. We'll see." I took off my coat. I hung it by the door. I stood in the kitchen for a moment and looked at my three children, sitting at the table their mother had eaten at for 39 years. "I'm going to cook tonight," I said. "All three of you are staying for dinner. Don't anyone tell me you have to catch a flight." "Dad." "Rachel, don't anyone tell me. Catch a later flight, change the ticket, pay the fee. I'll cover the fee if I have to. Tonight we eat together, and after dinner, I have something to show you upstairs. I want all three of you to be there." The three of them looked at each other. Whatever they had been planning the flights home, the return to their lives in Chicago and New York bent a little. "Okay, Dad," Michael said. "Okay." I made roast chicken, the way Eleanor used to make it, with lemon and rosemary and butter slipped under the skin. I peeled potatoes at the sink while the light went gold and then orange over the field behind the Callaway's place. Daniel asked if he could help. I gave him the carrots and a peeler and showed him how to do it the way I'd been taught when I was 9 years old. He didn't peel them very well. I didn't say anything. The thing about teaching a grown son to peel a carrot is you don't correct him. You let him do it the way he does it, and you eat the carrots the way they come out. And you remember that this is what your mother used to do when you were 9, and now you're 68, and the wheel has come around to a place you didn't know you were waiting for. Rachel set the table. She used Eleanor's good plates again, without asking, the way she'd seen me do it the night of the dinner. She put out the candles. She poured water into the 4 glasses I'd set out, then went into the cabinet over the refrigerator and found a bottle of wine I'd forgotten. Was there a bottle Eleanor and I had been saving for our 40th anniversary, which we never got to. Rachel held it up. "Dad, can we?" I looked at the bottle. The label was a little faded from the years. "Yes, honey, we can." She opened it. She poured 4 glasses. She set Eleanor's place at the head of the table the way she'd been taught, fork on the left, knife on the right, spoon next to the knife, napkin folded into a triangle. Michael came in from the back porch where he'd been on the phone with Sarah. His face was tired but easy in a way I hadn't seen it all week. We sat down. I asked Daniel to say grace this time. He looked startled. Daniel hasn't said grace at a table since he was about 14, but he bowed his head. And the rest of us bowed ours. And he said in a quiet voice, "Thank you, God, for this food. Thank you for this house. Thank you for our father. Thank you for our mother, wherever she is. Amen." "Amen," the rest of us said. We ate. The chicken was good. The carrots were the size of dominoes because Daniel didn't know how to peel them. But they were sweet. The way carrots can be at the very end of October when they've had a frost or two. The wine was older than it should have been, and a little bit oxidized. But Eleanor and I had bought it together at a winery in Door County the summer of 1998. And drinking it tasted like that summer, like sun on the lake, and the smell of cherry blossoms and the small, ordinary contentment of being married to a woman you loved. We talked about small things, about the grandkids, about a hike Rachel had taken in the Adirondacks last fall, about a woman Daniel had met at his old job, before he'd lost it, who he was thinking about calling, about Michael's older boy, who just made the middle school basketball team and who already played a little like his father had at that age, quiet, careful, a step too slow but in the right place every time. Nobody mentioned the house. Nobody mentioned the money. Nobody mentioned the debt or the divorce or the lost job or the bank or the $90,000 or Sarah's phone call. We just ate. We just talked. We were just a family at a table. When we were done, when the plates were empty and the wine was almost gone and the candles had burned down to half their length, I stood up. I took my napkin off my lap and folded it the way Eleanor had taught me to fold it. I set it on the table. "All right," I said. "Come upstairs." They looked at each other. They stood up. They followed me. I led them up the stairs slowly. My knees were tired from the cold morning in the dirt with Daniel, and from the cold afternoon at the diner, and from the 7 years I'd been climbing these stairs alone. But I made it up without holding the banister this time. I didn't want to look frail in front of them. Not for this. I led them down the hall to the bedroom Eleanor and I had shared. They had not been in this room since the funeral. I think I'd known that, in the way you know things about your own children without being told. None of them had gone in. They hadn't asked to, and I hadn't invited them. The room had been mine alone for 7 years, the bed I'd slept in by myself, the closet that still held her dresses, the dresser where her hairbrush still sat with 3 strands of her gray-brown hair still caught in the bristles. It had been a kind of chapel I'd built without meaning to. The kind of place a man goes when he wants to be near a woman he can no longer be near. I opened the door. The cedar box was still on the bed, where I'd set it that morning, on her side. On the side I hadn't put anything on in 7 years. Rachel saw it first. She put her hand over her mouth. "Oh, Dad!" "Sit down. All 3 of you. On the bed. The way you used to when you were small." There was a hesitation. Then Michael crossed the room and sat on one side of the box. Rachel sat on the other side. Daniel sat at the foot, his hand on the quilt that his mother had finished the year he was born. I stayed standing. "Your mother made this box in the last month of her life. With wood I brought her from the barn. Cedar the same as the floor of her closet. She sanded it herself, when her hands could barely hold the sandpaper. She lined it. She finished it. And she filled it. And then she told me, in a voice so soft I almost didn't hear it, that I was not to open it until the 3 of you came home with a need that mattered. Until you came home to me as the people you really were, and not the people you pretended to be." I paused. "Still, I have to tell you, all 3 of you, I have been waiting for that day for 7 years. I did not know if it would ever come. Some days I thought it would come at Christmas. Some days I thought it would come at a wedding. Some days I thought it would never come at all, and that I would die with this box on the shelf, and one of you would find it after I was gone, and you would open it then, without me, and I would never know what it had been for. Rachel was already crying. But today is the day. I want you to know that I'm not opening this because of the money trouble, or the divorce, or any of it. I'm opening it because today, for the first time in a very long time, the three of you sat at your mother's table and you talked to each other like the children she raised. Today is the day she meant. I sat down in Eleanor's chair by the window, the one she'd read in every morning of our marriage. Go ahead, Michael. You're the oldest. You open it. Michael's hands were trembling. He put them on the lid. He looked at me one more time. Dad. Go ahead, son. He opened the box. The smell came up out of it. Cedar, mostly. But underneath, something else. The faintest trace of her perfume. I don't know how she'd done that. I don't know how she'd put her own scent into a wooden box that had been sitting for 7 years on a closet shelf. But she had. And the three of them smelled it at the same time. And Rachel let out a small sound. And Daniel closed his eyes. Inside the box, there were 3 envelopes, cream-colored, heavy paper. On the front of each one, in Eleanor's handwriting, the handwriting they had each grown up reading on lunch bag notes and birthday cards, and the inside covers of books she had given them was a name. Michael, Rachel, Daniel. Beneath the envelopes, wrapped in tissue paper, were 3 other things. A pocket watch, but not my father's. A different one. A small one, woman's size, with a thin gold chain. A handkerchief, white, with the letter E embroidered in one corner in pale blue thread. A small leather-bound notebook, worn at the edges, with a faded red ribbon marking a page partway through. And at the bottom, folded in half, was a piece of paper I recognized. It had my name on it. I had not known there was anything in the box for me. The room got very quiet. Michael picked up his envelope. He looked at his name on the front. He looked up at me. Dad, should we read these here or? Wherever you want, son. They're yours. Your mother wrote them for you. The reading is between you and her. Rachel picked up her envelope. She held it against her chest with both hands. Oren, I want to read mine here, she said. I want to read it with you all here, so I'm not alone. Then we'll all read them here, Michael said. Daniel. Daniel nodded. He picked up his envelope. His hand was shaking. The 3 of them sat there on Eleanor's bed, each holding a letter from their mother. I sat in her chair by the window. The afternoon had gone past us. The light coming through the lace curtains was the soft pink-orange of a late October sunset. The room was full of cedar and perfume, and the long, slow breathing of 3 grown people about to hear their mother speak to them for the first time in 7 years. Go on, I said gently. Read them. They opened their envelopes. I closed my eyes. I did not need to read them. I knew Eleanor well enough to know what she had written to each of our children, even though I had never seen the words. I knew she would have written to Michael about responsibility, and to Rachel about being loved, and to Daniel about being enough. Those were the three things she had spent her life trying to give each of them. The way a gardener gives water to whichever plant needs it most. I let them read. I sat in her chair, and I held the folded paper with my own name on it in my lap. And I waited. I don't know exactly what Eleanor wrote to each of them. Some things in a family are not meant for everyone. Some letters are between a mother and a child, and a father can be in the room while they are read, and a father can know by watching the faces of his children that what is being said is good and true. But a father does not need to know the words. A father just needs to be there. Michael read his first. His face, the face that had been so tight and so guarded for so long, did something I had not seen it do since he was 9 years old at his grandmother's funeral. It broke open, slowly, like a piece of soft wood letting out its grain. He didn't cry hard. He cried the way a man cries when something inside him is finally allowed to settle. He read the letter 3 times. I watched him read it 3 times. When he was done, he folded it carefully along its existing creases. Eleanor had folded it before she sealed it, and he held it against his chest, the way Rachel had held hers before she'd opened it. Rachel read hers slower. She kept stopping. She would read a sentence, look up at the ceiling, breathe in through her nose, and then go back to it. Halfway through, she put it down on her lap and put both hands over her face. Her shoulders shook. Then she picked it up again and finished it. When she folded it twice, once along the original crease, and once again into a smaller square. The way you fold a letter you intend to keep in a small place close to you. Then she pressed it to her lips, just for a second, and lowered it to her lap. Daniel was the last to finish. He read very, very slowly. He moved his mouth a little, the way he had when he was first learning to read, when Eleanor had sat with him at this same bed and worked her finger under the words. Daniel cried while he read. Tears just running down, without sound, without effort. When he was done, he didn't fold his letter. He held it open in his lap, and he stared at it for a long time, like he was trying to memorize his mother's handwriting one more time before he had to put it away. Nobody said anything. The light through the curtains had gone gray. The sunset was past. The room was almost dark. I reached over to the lamp on Eleanor's bedside table, the one she'd kept her water glass next to for 40 years, and I switched it on. Warm yellow light filled the room. The 3 of them blinked in it. There's something else for each of you, I said. Your mother wanted me to give it to you. After you read your letters, whenever the time came. I stood up. My knees objected. I ignored them. I walked over to the bed and reached into the box. I picked up the gold pocket watch first, the woman's one, the small one with the thin chain. Summer, this was your grandmother's, I said. Your mother's mother. She wore it pinned to the inside of her dresses all through her teaching years. Your mother kept it after she passed, and she wanted you to have it. Rachel, because you are the only daughter we ever had, and because she knew you would understand what it meant to be a woman who carried her time on a chain over her heart. Rachel took the watch. She closed her hand around it. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. I picked up the handkerchief, the white one with the blue E. Your mother embroidered this when she was 16 years old, in a sewing class at her father's church. She kept it in her purse from the day she met me until the day she got too sick to carry a purse anymore. She wanted you to have it, Daniel, because you were our youngest, because you were the one who cried the easiest, because you were the one she always wanted to give a handkerchief to, and because, Daniel, she wanted you to know it is all right to cry. Your mother believed that the people who cry are the people who still feel, and she did not want you to ever stop feeling, not for anyone. Daniel took the handkerchief. He pressed it against his face. He breathed in whatever was left of her scent on it, and there must have been something, because his eyes closed and his shoulders relaxed, went into him, and he kept it. I picked up the notebook, the leather-bound one with the red ribbon. This is your mother's journal, Michael. From the year she got sick, she wrote in it almost every day. She wrote about you, about all of you, about what she hoped for you, about the things she didn't get to say. She wanted you to have it, son, because she knew you would need a guide someday. Not the kind you can buy in a store, the kind a mother writes for her oldest boy, when she knows she won't be there to give it to him in person. Michael took the notebook with both hands. He held it like a thing made of glass. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He just held it. The three of them sat there on the bed in the lamplight, each holding a piece of their mother. I sat back down in her chair by the window. I unfolded the piece of paper with my name on it. I read it. I am not going to tell you what it said. Some things in a marriage are not meant for everyone. Some letters are between a husband and a wife, and a man can read them in front of his children, and his children can know by watching his face that what is being said is good and true. But the children do not need to know the words. The children just need to see the man. I read it twice. I folded it. I put it in my shirt pocket, against my father's pocket watch. I looked up at the three of them. Your mother was a great woman, I said. I want you to remember that, not just because she was your mother, but because she was a great woman in her own right. And I was the lucky one. I was the one who got to come home to her for 40 years. The three of you got the first 18. I got the rest. And in fairness to me, I got the harder 18, where she was tired and sick and at the end. But you got the 18 where she was a young mother. And I would not trade. I would not trade for anything. Rachel reached over and took my hand. We sat there in the lamplight. The house was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that had been in it the night of the dinner. A different quiet. The quiet of a thing that had been held for a long time and was finally being put down. I don't remember exactly how we got back downstairs that night. I remember Michael carrying the box. I remember Rachel turning off the lamp. I remember Daniel pausing in the doorway and looking back at the empty bed and the closet door I'd left open and the chair where I'd been sitting. And I remember the look on his face like a man saying goodbye to someone who was finally able to leave the room. We did not talk about the house that night. We did not talk about the $80,000 or the condo in Chicago or the lost apartment in some neighborhood I'd never been to. We did not make plans. We did not draw up papers. Rachel did not open her briefcase. Michael did not open his laptop. We sat in the living room by the fireplace. I put another log on. Daniel sat on the rug at my feet, the way he used to when he was small. Michael sat in Eleanor's chair. Rachel curled up on the couch under the Afghan Eleanor had knitted the winter of 1995. We talked about her. We told stories, every one of us, in turn. Rachel told the one about the spaghetti sauce on the ceiling. Daniel told the one about the time Eleanor had driven him 3 hours to a state spelling bee and got pulled over on the way home for going 85 in a 65. And she had told the trooper she was sorry, but her son had won and she was excited, and the trooper had let her off with a warning. Michael told the one about the morning of his wedding, when Eleanor had pulled him aside in the church basement and whispered in his ear, "Michael, if she's the one, you'll never need anybody else. And if she's not the one, you'll know. But she's the one. I can tell." I told the one about the yellow dress at the county fair. The 3 of them had heard it before. They didn't mind hearing it again. We sat there until the fire was nothing but coals. Around midnight, Rachel said she should go to bed. Daniel said he'd stay up a little longer. Michael said he needed to call Sarah one more time before he slept. They got up one by one. They came over and kissed me on the forehead, all 3 of them. Even Michael, who hadn't kissed his father in 25 years. They went off to their rooms. I sat by the dying fire. I took out the folded paper with my name on it. I read it one more time. I held it for a while. I didn't open the box on the table again. The kids would take their pieces of it in the morning. The box itself I would put back on the shelf. Empty. Eleanor would have wanted that. Or maybe she'd have wanted me to throw it in the fire. I don't know. I'd ask her about it in my prayers later. I went to bed. I slept. For the first time in 7 years, I slept the whole night through. The kids left on Thursday morning. We did not have a big breakfast. We did not have a grand farewell. They had things to get back to. Michael had his family and his bank and his work. Rachel had her cases. Daniel had Daniel had a return ticket and a couch in his friend's apartment, and a plan that he and Michael and I had worked out in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, while Rachel was still asleep. He'd come back to Millbrook in 2 weeks. He'd stay with me through the winter. He'd help me with the things I couldn't do alone anymore. The snow, the roof, the storm windows. He'd look for a remote job. He'd figure himself out, in the place where he'd been figured out the first time. I drove them to the airport in Madison, the 3 of them in the truck with me, like 1,000 other times when they were kids. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. At the curb, Michael hugged me. He held on a long time. "Dad." "Yes, son." "Thank you." "For what?" "For not selling." I patted his back. "I never was, son. You just didn't know it yet." He laughed. He pulled away. He picked up his bag. Rachel kissed my cheek. She put something in my coat pocket. I didn't look at it until later. It was a photograph she'd taken with her phone of the 4 of us, sitting around the table the night before, the candles still lit. Eleanor's empty chair at the head where Rachel had set it. We hadn't even known she was taking the picture. Daniel just hugged me, hard, for a long time. "See you in 2 weeks, Dad." "See you in 2 weeks, son." I watched the 3 of them walk through the sliding glass doors at the terminal. I watched until I couldn't see them anymore. Then I drove home. I am sitting on the front porch now. Same porch as the one I started on. Same cup of coffee. freshly made this time. Same oak tree, bare now, every leaf gone, the branches dark against the November sky. I do not know what my children will do with this house when I am gone. I have not signed any papers. I have not drawn up any deeds. I have not told them my plan, because I do not have a plan, beyond living the days that are still in front of me as well as I can. But I know this. I know that the house is not the inheritance. The house is not what I have left them. The house is just the wood and the stone and the cedar shingles that hold up the place where the inheritance happens. The inheritance is the silence between a father and his children, the silence that says, I see you, I see what you are, I see what you have done, and what you have tried to hide, and what you have been carrying alone, and I am not going anywhere, and neither is this house, while I am still in it. And neither am I. That is what my father gave me, with his pocket watch and his $9,000 and his hand on my shoulder the day we set the last roof beam in 1975. That is what I have tried to give my children, in my own way, in this week and in the 50 years before it. I do not know if I did it right. I do not know if any father does it right. But I know that this morning, my 3 children are flying back to their own lives, and they are bringing pieces of their mother with them, and they are carrying something I gave them too, the simple, quiet, stubborn knowledge that they have a place to come home to, that they have always had it, that they will always have it. And that, more than anything I built with my hands, is what my father meant. You don't build a house for yourself. You build it for the ones that aren't born yet. And then you keep it open as long as you can, as long as God gives you the strength. The oak tree moves in the wind. A single late leaf, the last one, comes loose from a high branch and drifts down, slow as a feather, and lands on the porch beside my chair. I pick it up, red and gold, curled at the edges. I put it in my shirt pocket, next to my father's watch and my wife's last letter. I drink my coffee. I watch the sun come up. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. Thank you for letting an old man tell you about his house and his wife and his 3 grown children. If anything in this story reminded you of someone you love, a father, a mother, a child of your own who needs to come home, I hope you'll reach out to them. Today, if you can. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. I learned that the hard way, sitting beside Eleanor's bed 7 years ago. If this story spoke to your heart, please share it with someone who might need it. Subscribe if you'd like to come back and sit with me again. And if you pray, please say a small prayer for the fathers who are still trying. We're doing our best. We always have been. We just don't always know how to say it. God bless you. God bless your home. And may every house you love stay open as long as it's needed. Good night.